You know how we're always talking about being savvy shoppers? Well, get ready to level up because today's deep dive is all about counterfeit goods, a topic you flagged. And let me tell you, after going through this 2019 U.S. government report, USPTO counterfeit, things are way shadier than I ever imagined.
It's a rabbit hole, that's for
Yeah.
sure. And the report doesn't hold back. It actually states that in 2019, the global counterfeit market was worth like $2.8 trillion. To put that into perspective, that's bigger than the entire GDP of most countries.
2.8 trillion. Whoa, my brain can't even process numbers that big. But the report says even that's likely an underestimation.
Yeah. This report relies heavily on what authorities managed to seize, which is like
You know.
trying to measure an iceberg by the tip poking above water. Think about all the fakes that slip through the cracks, sold online, shipped directly, or even produced domestically. We're talking about a massive hidden market.
Okay, so it's huge. But how does this actually hit home? What's the impact on us here in the U.S.?
Well, brace yourself. The report estimates the U.S. economy could lose nearly like $1 trillion. By 2022, due to counterfeit goods, that's money lost from legitimate businesses, jobs that vanish, and even the government takes a hit with reduced tax revenue.
So we're not just talking about some knockoff handbags here. This is serious.
It goes way beyond handbags. What's really concerning is the potential impact on our health and safety. The report dives into counterfeit pharmaceuticals, car parts, even aircraft components, posing very real dangers.
Wait, aircraft parts, as in the things keeping planes in the air. The report actually mentions that. This is getting serious.
It's a scary thought. And the report highlights a few chilling examples. In one case, counterfeit fasteners, meant for aircraft engines, were traced back to a supplier who simply slapped, like fake markings on low-grade materials. Imagine the potential consequences if those parts failed mid-flight.
Okay, that's terrifying. It's like playing Russian roulette with everyday products. But hold on, the report does talk about how people are fighting back, right? What's being done to tackle this massive problem?
Absolutely. And it's not just about authorities cracking down. Companies are stepping up their game, employing cutting-edge technology to combat counterfeiting. We're talking microscopic imaging to verify authenticity, even machine learning algorithms that can sniff out fake websites.
So it's like a technological arms race?
Exactly. The report actually calls it a constant cat-and-mouse game, with both sides constantly innovating to stay one step ahead. It's actually quite fascinating. For example, have you heard of DNA tagging?
Like using actual DNA to track products. That sounds straight out of a sci-fi movie.
It does, doesn't it? But it's a real thing. Companies are embedding microscopic DNA markers into their products. These markers are virtually impossible to replicate, making it much harder for counterfeiters to pass off fakes as the real deal.
That's incredible. So technology is playing a huge role on both sides of this battle. But the report also talks about how e-commerce and these new delivery services have actually fueled the counterfeit fire, right?
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Hmm.
On one hand, e-commerce has been a game changer, giving us access to products from all over the world with just a few clicks. But this convenience has also opened the floodgates for counterfeiters.
It's like the Wild West out there, just with virtual storefronts instead of saloons.
Precisely. The report, and this part I found really interesting, actually uses data from U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, to illustrate this point. They found a 48% surge in the number of small parcels seized for containing counterfeit goods between 2011 and 2018. And here's the kicker. The value of those counterfeit products more than doubled in the same period. It's a massive and growing problem.
So even though authorities are trying to crack down, the counterfeiters are still finding ways to slip through.
Exactly. They're incredibly adaptable, constantly finding new ways to exploit the system. But don't worry, all hope is not lost. This report doesn't just highlight the problems, it also points to solutions. And what's really interesting is that it stresses the importance of collaboration between governments, law enforcement agencies, private companies, and even, get this, consumers like you and me.
Hold on, consumers, you're saying we have a role to play in all of this. I thought we were just the victims here. Tell me more.
Absolutely. You see, knowledge is power. The more aware we are as consumers about the issue of counterfeit goods, the better we can protect ourselves and make informed decisions. The report actually talks about how a lot of counterfeit sales aren't even about people knowingly seeking a bargain, but rather being tricked into it.
Wait, tricked. So you're saying people don't even realize they're buying fakes? Tell me more about that.
It's true. And it all comes down to the increasing sophistication of counterfeiters, especially online. We're talking about stolen images, Fake websites designed to look like legitimate brands, and even hijack brand names, all used to deceive unsuspecting buyers.
So it's not just those shady back alley deals anymore. It's happening in broad daylight on the internet.
Exactly, and the sheer volume of online transactions makes it even harder to police. The report specifically points to social media platforms like Instagram. Did you know there was like a 171% increase in counterfeit activity on Instagram between 2016 and 2019?
171%. That's insane. But it makes sense. We see product ads all the time on social media. It's easy to get fooled.
Exactly.
Uh,
And here's where it gets really interesting. The report talks about how the very things that make social media so engaging, the sense of community, the recommendations from friends and influencers, are the same things counterfeiters exploit. We trust these platforms, so we're more likely to let our guard down.
Wow, that's a really good point. It makes you think twice about those too good to be true deals that pop up in your feed, right?
It certainly should. And this isn't just about luxury handbags or designer clothes. The report highlights the alarming trend of counterfeit pharmaceuticals being sold online, often to people desperate for cheaper medication. Imagine the risks involved in unknowingly taking fake medication.
That's terrifying. It's not just economic damage. We're talking about a potential public health crisis.
Exactly. And that brings us to another crucial question. Why are consumers willing to buy these fakes in the first place? Is it all about saving a buck? The report actually delves into this, exploring consumer motivations, and it's fascinating stuff.
Okay, let's unpack that. If it's not just about the price, what else is driving people towards counterfeit goods?
Well, the report suggests it's more nuanced than you might think. While price is definitely a factor, there are other motivations at play. Curiosity, the allure of owning something aspirational, even social pressure.
So it's not just about being cheap, it's about our desires, aspirations, maybe even insecurities.
Precisely. And this is where the line between intentional and unintentional purchases starts to blur. The report highlights a growing trend of counterfeiters marketing their goods as replicas or inspired by designs, often at prices just slightly lower than the real deal.
Ah, so they make it seem less like you're buying a fake and more like you're getting a deal.
Tricky. It is. And studies cited in the report found that younger consumers, those aged 18 to 34, are twice as likely to knowingly buy counterfeit products compared to older generations.
Why is that? Is it just because they're more digitally savvy?
It's likely a combination of factors. They're more comfortable navigating online marketplaces. They've grown up
Hmm.
surrounded by e-commerce. And let's be honest, they're arguably more influenced by trends in social media where a lot of these counterfeit goods are being pushed.
So counterfeiters are basically adapting their strategies to target specific demographics, those more susceptible to these tactics. That's actually quite clear, though, obviously still wrong. This entire conversation has been a real eye-opener. It's making me realize that this isn't just about knockoff handbags. It's a much bigger issue with far-reaching consequences. But the report does talk about solutions, right? What's
Yeah,
being done to fight back?
absolutely. It wouldn't be a deep dive without exploring solutions.
Right.
The report highlights several promising initiatives from both governments and the private sector. We've already talked about technology being used to detect fakes, but there's also a big push to strengthen legal frameworks, disrupt supply chains, and perhaps most importantly, educate consumers.
So it's a multi-pronged approach, tackling the problem from all angles. Makes sense.
Exactly. And requires a global effort. The report stresses how international collaborations are crucial to combat this transnational crime. Think of it like a puzzle. Each piece, whether it's law enforcement, the industry technology, or even consumer awareness, is essential to completing the picture and effectively combating counterfeiting.
I like that analogy. No one entity can solve this alone. It takes a collective effort. But with all that said, what would you say is the key takeaway from this report? What's the one thing you want our listener to remember from this deep dive?
That's a great question. I think the most crucial message is that counterfeiting is no longer a fringe issue. It's a pervasive threat that affects all of us, whether we realize it or not. This report is a call to action for us to be more informed, vigilant, and proactive in protecting ourselves and our communities from the harmful effects of counterfeit goods.
Knowledge is power, right? The more we understand, the better choices we can make.
Exactly. And it's not just about avoiding fakes ourselves. It's about having open conversations, raising awareness, and demanding greater accountability from businesses and platforms.
I love that. It's about being empowered to make a difference. This report does an excellent job outlining the what, the how, and even the who of counterfeiting. But I'm curious about something.
That's it.
It strikes me that we spent all this time digging into the mechanics of counterfeiting, but what about the bigger picture? Why are we as a society so fixated on brands and labels that we're willing to fuel this massive counterfeit industry? It feels like there's a deeper conversation to be had there.
You're absolutely right. This report does a phenomenal job of laying out like the facts and figures, but it doesn't really delve into the psychological and sociological factors that create a demand for these goods in the first place. That's a whole other deep dive waiting to happen.
Right. Like, are we that insecure that we need a fake designer logo to feel validated? Or are we so caught up in consumerism that we've lost sight of the ethical implications?
It's complex, isn't it? There's a certain status associated with certain brands. A sense of belonging, maybe even an escape from the everyday. And for some, a fake might be the closest they can get to that feeling. Then there's the whole issue of fast fashion and the constant pressure to keep up with trends, which makes those cheaper alternatives, even if they're counterfeit, all the more tempting. It's like we're wired to want what we can't have, or maybe what we're told we should want. So where does that leave us? The report doesn't offer easy answers, does it?
It doesn't, but it does leave us with some thought-provoking questions. For example, the report briefly touches on the idea of conscious consumerism. Like if we as consumers were more aware of the human and environmental costs associated with counterfeiting, would that change our purchasing decisions? Food for thought.
That really resonates. It's easy to get caught up in the moment. But maybe if we pause to consider the real cost of that too good to be true deal, the exploitation of workers, the environmental damage, the potential health risks, it might give us pause.
Exactly. It's about making informed choices that align with our values. And I think that's a powerful takeaway from this deep dive.
Absolutely. So to our listener, we've armed you with the knowledge. Now it's time to use it. Be a savvy shopper, question those deals. And remember that your choices have a ripple effect. We can all be part of the solution.
Well said. And with that, we'll leave you with this final thought. What role do you want to play in the fight against counterfeit goods? Until next time, keep those critical thinking skills sharp. And happy diving!